Day one of NBA free agency is basically in the books, and while one of the big chips in Paul George has fallen, no major clarity has been added for the Chicago Bulls. We're going to take a look at the kind of rumors that have been around the Bulls in the opening of free agency and what really are the Chicago Bulls cap situation and roster situation like, as many Bulls fans are asking themselves, why have the Chicago Bulls not done anything? We're going to get into all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host here, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today. So, free agency, day one, is open, and there's been no clarity made in either way of Zach LaVine or DeMar DeRozan, kind of the two biggest chips that a lot of Bulls fans are waiting and seeing what's going to happen. Now, we do know that Andre Drummond is signing with the Philadelphia 76ers, as did Paul George, officially signing now with the 76ers, which could start bringing some clarity. But right at the start of free agency, we got something interesting I want to talk about, is that I released a video, some rumors that the Golden State Warriors could pivot towards either Brandon Ingram or Zach LaVine with the pending departure of Klay Thompson. Right after the start of free agency, basically, we found out that the Chicago Bulls proposed a trade to the Golden State Warriors centered around Chris Paul and Andrew Wiggins, and that the Warriors turned that trade down and instead decided to waive Chris Paul instead of trying to get anything back with his $30 million salary. Now, Chris Paul eventually goes and joins the San Antonio Spurs on day one of free agency, but it means, and it is another thing in the sign that the Bulls are just having trouble moving Zach LaVine. Now, that could be, but I think the biggest things when you look at it, of course, maybe some injury concerns with him. The contract is probably the biggest thing, and teams know that the Bulls are desperate to move Zach LaVine. Now, I'm surprised that the Bulls were on the phone. Well, not surprised that they're on the phone, but surprised that they, made an offer on day one. I personally still hold out the thing that I don't think Zach is moved until after the full first wave of free agency is done, meaning maybe even after a decision is made on DeMar DeRozan. So, it's surprising that even for Chris Paul, the Bulls can get something done. And I do think that it points towards the growing chance that Zach LaVine is on the Chicago Bulls roster to start the season off. I initially didn't think that, but as this market just continues to go and it seems like teams are just completely down on Zach LaVine, it seems less and less likely that the Bulls are going to be able to move him. When you look at kind of the rumored Bulls suitors, right? All of them have made different moves that could point towards the Bulls not being, those teams not being interested in Zach LaVine. You look at the Orlando Magic, a team that was really rumored around Zach LaVine for a while there, that because of, their offensive deficiencies, while they've been a very good defensive team, could look to make a move to get Zach LaVine. Instead, they go Caldwell Pope, giving him a $22 million annual average salary there for 3 years, $66 million. That just does not end up working. That means they're probably not in the Zach LaVine sweepstakes. Then you look at the Sacramento Kings, a team that's been listed as the add-on favorite. They have re-signed Malik Monk. Now, that doesn't necessarily keep them out of maybe the running for Zach LaVine, as they still are underneath the luxury tax and still could acquire Zach LaVine without going into that tax. Maybe it's still an option there. Maybe both teams are kind of waiting out, seeing if they can get anything better. And maybe it does end up just being the Kevin Huerter and Harrison Barnes deal. Now, I'm not saying that that's for sure, but that's a possibility. And then the Golden State Warriors, a team that popped up that actually makes some sense when you look at how, Zach LaVine being able to come in, do catch and shoot things. They haven't really moved on as far as acquiring anybody, but a big trade chip as far as that they could use to acquire a contract the size of Zach LaVine, that's now gone as well in Chris Paul. So, we'll see. The Zach LaVine trade drama is going to be an interesting one to watch, because it just does seem more and more likely that maybe those rumors around Zach LaVine not having a market are maybe more true than what I hold myself accountable than what I thought, right? We'll still see. Any contract can be moved, but the desire has to be there from both sides to get it done. The Bulls are going to have to give up some things that they may want, and vice versa. But if the number one, which Casey Johnson and other people have alluded to, the number one goal for the Chicago Bulls this offseason is moving Zach LaVine, it does not seem like they are going to be successful in that. It just does not seem like that's the route that this is going to go. Could that change? this is we know free agency is a very fluid thing, so anything can change at any time. But at least right now, doesn't seem like that's probably going to be the thing. But we'll see. It can change at any time. And then with Paul George signing with the 76ers, this now has pivoted odds towards maybe we find out a decision with DeMar DeRozan sooner rather than later. Mark Stein reported yesterday that DeMar DeRozan wants to wait to get a better feel for his suitors if the Chicago Bulls do not make a serious plan to retain him after Paul George makes his decision. Well, now that Paul George has made that decision, it really now keeps or opens up the other teams that could be looking to add a veteran presence. Now, the Clippers seem to be moving in other directions, right? The Clippers have made moves in bringing Kevin Porter Jr. back to the NBA. They actually signed Derrick Jones Jr. as well. So if the Clippers were one of the teams that could have been interested in DeMar DeRozan, that may have changed. Now, I'm not saying that either one of those players give better output than DeMar DeRozan, but when you look at, Kevin Porter Jr., he signed for a vet minimum. Derrick Jones Jr. signed for a 3-year deal on $10 million. So, that's something as well to look at. But if anybody thought that the Clippers were a natural fit for DeMar DeRozan, considering all things, we may be seeing the Clippers even go in a different direction as well with their roster. So, they still could do a sign and trade if they decide to do so. Those options do exist there for them. But they are right now $85 million over the salary cap. So, they do still have $22 million beneath that first tax apron. So they have some room to do some things if they decide to do it. But it'll be interesting to see if the Clippers do get back in on, rumored for DeMar DeRozan. But if DeMar is not staying with the Chicago Bulls, which we still heard that there's no momentum in a contract or that they're even talking contract extension, DeMar DeRozan, once he signs elsewhere or the Bulls renounce his rights, which they may not do because sign and trade opportunities are there, that kind of frees up some of the Chicago Bulls money. So we'll see what happens there. But the two biggest kind of things that happen with the Chicago Bulls or that people are waiting to happen in Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan just have not gotten any forward momentum as of yet. And DeMar is probably more likely to catch that forward momentum than Zach LaVine is, just because DeMar is an unrestricted free agent. So we could hear something about that as early as today. You guys know if news drops on it, I will drop an episode. That's just how we do it here at Chicago Bulls Central. So make sure you guys are hitting that subscribe button because, we bring up-to-the-minute breaking news, especially during free agency. So if something were to break with DeMar DeRozan or Zach LaVine, we'll definitely have that covered. Now, with that said, I want to talk about where the Bulls do sit right now. A lot of Bulls fans are asked, why have the Bulls not been more active in free agency, especially after the Drummond thing? We couldn't re-sign him for that. And I want to talk about where the Bulls are right now and kind of give it an overarching view so we can kind of put everything together. Right now, the Chicago Bulls have 13 players under contract. That's including Zach LaVine. That's including Lonzo Ball. And that's with Ernolat Batum being a non-guaranteed deal, so they could waive him and create another open roster spot, right? So 13 players, and they also have one two-way player signed in Andrew Funk. Henry Drell, Adama Sanogo aren't signing deals right now. Adama Sanogo, of course, is a restricted free agent. I think that the Bulls are probably, if they don't find another big, going to convert him to a full NBA deal. But the Bulls sit right now with 13 players under contract. And that's why you're not seeing very much momentum. The Bulls are trying to move on from Zach LaVine. And they're probably going to have to take multiple players back to do that, which would then possibly take their roster from 13 to 14, and then you only have one roster spot. So when people are asking, why have the Bulls not been more active so far, this is why. They are at 13 players on the roster. And, Torrey Craig picking up his option took away a spot. Now, I'm not mad at it because I don't think you're going to get anybody better than Torrey Craig necessarily for where it seems like the Bulls are going. But you have that, right? So the Bulls right now have a projected salary of $149 million, which that right now would put the Bulls at about the luxury tax threshold is $171 million. That means that the Chicago Bulls are $22 million below the luxury tax. But that doesn't mean that they have $22 million they can just go out and spend on players because they are over the salary cap. And I explain this every year because, and not to condescend to anybody, but a lot of fans, more casual ones, don't really understand that over the cap and over the luxury tax are different things. So the Bulls are always over the salary cap. That limits your flexibility. While the Bulls have $22 million beneath the luxury tax, that does not mean they can just go out and offer somebody $22 million. When you're over the salary cap, the only way that you can exceed that by signing players are either re-signing your own players, which you can exceed that to do, or that's because you have bird rights, or you can use your exceptions. The Chicago Bulls have 2 exceptions that they can use to sign players to the team. They have a mid-level exception at $12.9 million. The mid-level exception can be broken up across multiple players. So you can, for example, it's $12.9 million. You can sign one player for $6 million, another player for $6 million. You can sign 3 players for $4 million, right? So that's how you can use your mid-level exception. The Bulls also have a biannual exception worth $4.7 million. Now, why this is key is that while the Bulls right now are $22 million below the luxury tax, that allows them to use both their exceptions theoretically of $12.9 million that can be split up and $4.7 million. So the Bulls basically have a little right at $17 million of spending power that they can do. The mid-level and the biannual exception cannot be combined to sign a player. It can't be. So, for example, the Bulls can't go out and sign a player who wants $20 million, even though, $17 million, even though they have $17 million in spending power. So that's how to use that, right? The Bulls also have pending free agents of DeMar DeRozan and Javonte Green, a 2-way in Henry Drell, right? He wasn't on the main roster, and Adama Sanogo. So the Bulls right now have to kind of wait for a couple of things. They have to wait to see if they can move Zach LaVine, because you can get multiple players back for that, which could take up some of those spots and some of your money that you're over the luxury tax. You have to wait on DeMar DeRozan to sign with the team, because if you do get offered a sign and trade, or a team does need a sign and trade to facilitate that, you could be taking back players or taking back salary, which could then also affect how you use your exceptions. So right now, Bulls fans, I get it. It's frustrating. Make no mistake about it. I'm not saying that it's not. But when you ask things like, why aren't the Bulls more active? If they're hoping for a sign and trade for DeMar, or they're still holding out hope that they're going to be able to move Zach LaVine, they are not in a position right now to be able to do that, to use their exceptions, because they could be taking back more players. For example, I'm just using this because it's a rumored deal. If the Bulls were to complete that trade with the Sacramento Kings, their roster spots will go down from 2 roster spots to 1, because they're taking both Kevin Huerter back and Harrison Barnes. They still would maintain their ability to use their mid-level exception in that deal. They actually would get a little bit more, because that deal is a little bit less than Zach LaVine's contract. So they'd be able to actually spend even more of that, right, theoretically. And so because of that, they could then target their center or whatever else. So right now, the Bulls are in a holding pattern. I wouldn't be surprised if Adama Sanogo doesn't sign his deal until after they make a decision on those 2, because if you get a big back, for example, in a move, in a sign and trade for DeMar, or in a trade for Zach LaVine, they probably look to keep Adama as a 2-way contract then. If they don't get a big back, they can look to convert him to a full NBA deal, and then he's actually on the roster as a backup center. Right now, right or wrong, a lot of the Bulls' flexibility is tied into what they're trying to accomplish with DeMar and with Zach. If DeMar DeRozan is signed and traded, again, that takes away a roster spot. Because right now you were not counting DeMar towards a roster spot because he's not officially on the roster. So if you get a player back, you then go from 2 open spots to 1, right? And then Javonte Green as well. Like, I'm sure the Bulls are hoping to probably be able to bring him back. But again, it has to make sense with whatever they get back. And eventually, if the Bulls just make the decision or come to the realization, we're probably not moving Zach LaVine, maybe you start seeing a little bit of movement then. But I think they're actively waiting to see if a team makes a pivot to Zach, or if the team that eventually signs DeMar DeRozan needs a sign and trade before they do anything. But the benefit of that is that the Bulls do have their full mid-level exception to use, as long as they're not bringing back DeMar. Even if they don't trade Zach LaVine because he's counting against the cap, because he is on a contract, they still would be able to use their full mid-level exception. And that's something coming into free agency it didn't initially look like they were going to be able to do. So that's the thought process behind that. I know it's a long-winded one for those that don't like the intricacies of how the salary cap works, but that's where we sit right now. So the Bulls have 13 players under contract. That's including a non-guaranteed team, and that's including, of course, Zach LaVine and Lonzo Ball, which they could waive and stretch Zoe or buy out if they decide to do that. I don't think that's likely at this point. They also have Adama Sanogo restricted, right? He could he's restricted to a 2-way contract, so he could still sign a G League deal. And then they have Andrew Funk and Henry Drell as free agents, but former players that were on two-way contracts. I don't think they're going to convert either one of those to full-time deals. And then they have outright free agents of Javonte Green and DeMar DeRozan. So that's how you got to look at things. I hope that I did a really good job at explaining that for the fans that have been at the Bulls fans, not fans, I don't have fans, that have been explaining why the Bulls aren't. And hopefully as well as explaining what the Bulls' spending power is this offseason as well. Now, with that said, of course, with free agency, I expect to have voicemails every day. We got 2 voicemails today. This one's from Jamal.
What's up, Haize? It's your boy Jamal back again. Another voicemail, please. 3 minutes, let's jump into it. So I just got done watching a video regarding the rumor that the Golden State Warriors might be interested in trading for Zach LaVine. I thought this was a topic I could really talk about with you because I've always stated I am a diehard Bulls fan, but I'm a bandwagon Warriors fan. Ever since Steph Curry came in, I've been probably they're the only other team I root for to win the championship outside of Chicago. So I've always had a bias of the Bulls trading. If we were going to trade to anybody, trade to the Golden State Warriors because, heck, if we can't win the championship, I'd much rather see them out of any other team win it. But that's my own biases. After listening to what you were talking about on there, and then again, it was a rumor. It wasn't, this wasn't a factual offer or anything like that, but the idea of trading Zach, Nikola Vucevic, and Torrey Craig for Chris Paul, Andrew Wiggins, Trace Jackson Davis, and I can't remember who the other person was that you had offered. After listening to that idea, and Kevon Looney, that seems like a very win-win situation for both teams. The Warriors get back a young player in Zach LaVine, who, like you stated, isn't a Klay Thompson type, but the Warriors have a good chance of getting the best out of Zach. I think both offensively and defensively, he can play off ball next to Steph and one-off screens, which the numbers have shown Zach is much better when he's playing off screens and things like that. They also get a legitimate big man who's also a very good post player, as well as somebody who can attack the mid-range, and they're not going to need Vooch to shoot threes as much. And Vooch will have shooters all around him, so he can pass out. And I think they can get some good defense out of him. As far as the Bulls, Trace Jackson Davis would fit perfectly on this team as a rim-running big man. I've loved his game when he plays for the Warriors, and he will fit so perfectly with this young team now and can be the starting big man. Kevon Looney can come off the bench as a backup. And, we might not keep Chris Paul, and I know they just waived Chris Paul, but it wouldn't even matter. Andrew Wiggins would be a nice fit, too. So I think it could work out really well. I'm going to send you another voicemail regarding my thoughts on Patrick Williams signing his deal, but we'll wait until that voicemail comes in because I'm still working on my thoughts. But, again, it was just a rumor. We'll see what actually happens. As always, beware and go Bulls. Peace.
I think that, you left this voicemail before we found out that the Warriors actually did turn down the deal for LaVine. And yeah, the projected deal that we talked about that was rumored would have been a really good deal, I think, for the Bulls. But I think now that we hear that the Warriors have rejected that deal that would have included Chris Paul, it doesn't theoretically keep them from being involved. They could still, but I don't think they would give up the pieces that would be needed to now take on a contract the size of Zach LaVine. So I think the Warriors are just out of this. Maybe that could change, but they are looking to replace Klay. Reportedly that they were ready to offer something to Paul George. So maybe they do eventually pivot. I do think that eventually a team is going to need some scoring and could look to Zach LaVine. Now, I don't know if that happens this free agency. That could not happen until the trade deadline. But I think that the Bulls are going to continue to be motivated to move LaVine, and it just becomes about which team, if a team does become interested out in free agency, of acquiring Zach LaVine. So let me know what you guys think on that down below. Great voicemail from Jamal, as always. Let's get into this next one. This one's from Reginald.
Hey, this is Reginald from Columbus, Georgia. Just looking at the couple of moves the Bulls made in the last 72 hours, giving P. Will the extension, having Torrey Craig opt in, and giving Jonathan Nogo a player option. I actually like all these moves, and my question to you is, what do you think the starting five should look like in terms of you have a lot of players who play the same position, but there's only one ball and so many minutes you can have out there for each guy. So what do you think of a starting five where it's Torrey Craig and Io in it with Josh Giddey and P. Will coming off the bench? I know a lot of Bulls fans has it penciled in the other way, but that was well, before we knew that the Bulls couldn't move Zach off the team, because I really don't like the idea of having Giddey, Zach, and Vooch on the floor at the same time. I mean, the defensive liability, it'll just be a nightmare. And I don't think they have the offensive firepower to go out there and put up 120 a night. But with a starting five of Kobe, Ion, Zach, Torrey Craig, and Vooch be good enough to keep them competitive with having the offense and flexibility of Giddey, P. Will, Sonogo, and Phillips and Terry. I'm not sure that would be what the 10-man rotation will be like at the start of the season, but I fully believe Billy's not going to play the rookie, and I think he'll probably send Denham back to the G League just to get some shots. But my last thing is, where does that leave Lonzo Ball? I know he's not going to play back-to-back nights. I know he's not going to play every other night. He's probably not even going to get more than 8 to 12 minutes a game this year. But is it possible to start him off in the G League just for him to get reps and just for him to see if he can handle 5-on-5 contact? But I know I asked you a lot of questions, but what's your opinion?
Listen, I think a lot of people, that are down on the moves that the Bulls have made so far are because of expectation. And I get it. It sucks when it feels like your team is going to be worse. And when you come to that recollection that the Bulls are going to be worse. So, it comes down to it. And ultimately, I think this. You asked me what the starting five looks like. And I really can't predict it right now because so much is up in the air. Like, if Zach LaVine does return, I think you have to start Zach. And I get what you're saying, and you don't want Giddey, LaVine, and Vooch on the floor. But that may very well be what we see because I don't think they're going to have Zach come off the bench. I don't think they're going to have Kobe White come off the bench because, everything that we've heard is they don't want to diminish Kobe's role. So I think you're looking at via what we have right now, right? And this could change with any move. Josh Giddey, Kobe White, Zach LaVine, Patrick Williams, Nikola Vucevic. That's probably what you're looking at as a starting five. With Ayo Dosunmu being your first guard off the bench, Mattis Bucilis, your rookie, he's going to get some minutes as well. We don't have a backup center as of right now, but I think if we don't sign anybody else, that's going to naturally be Adama Sanogo. And then you got players like Torrey Craig, Dalen Terry, Julian Phillips, Erdelat Batum, Lonzo Ball, Javon Carter, those guys coming off the bench for you. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with that, man. And we'll see how it ends up going. But that's where the Bulls sit right now, guys. And we'll see where everything ends at, man. But thank you, Reginald, for leaving that voicemail. And, as we go through free agency, of course, I'll have a more solid feel on, like, what the Bulls starting five could be. But so much is up in air right now. It's really hard, brother. But, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. BullsCentralPod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. That's thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.